This podcast is brought to you by Arete Media.
Welcome back to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're joining our friends from the Final Frontier podcast to analyze another episode of Star Trek with them.
We really are. And, if you think watching a 1960s sci-fi show today is just about marveling at the retrofuturism or enjoying a nostalgic trip down memory lane, yeah, think again.
Oh, absolutely. We just finished watching Jake and Justin from the Final Frontier podcast dissect a classic 1967 episode called Obsession. And our mission today isn't to give you a dry plot summary of a 60-year-old television script.
Right. No one wants that.
Exactly. Instead, we're looking at how a classic piece of media becomes an unintentional comedy when viewed through the ruthless fact-checking lens of 2026.
That is the real focus here. We're examining their specific commentary on the wild character swings, the incredibly questionable 1960s science, and just the sheer comedic tragedy of being a background character in Starfleet.
Yeah, and for you listening right now, whether you are a die-hard Trekkie who has memorized every starship schematic, or you're just someone who loves a good pop culture breakdown, watching two friends dissect a vintage show like this provides a fascinating look into how our media consumption has evolved.
It really does. But let's start with what Jake and Justin zeroed in on right away in their video, which is Captain Kirk's behavior. They immediately compare Kirk to Captain Ahab from the novel Moby Dick.
Which makes sense, right? But I wonder, is it fair to hold a 1967 sci-fi show to 2026 internet sleuth standards? It feels a bit like bringing a calculator to a poetry reading. You're bound to find technical errors if you look that closely, but you might miss the art.
Well, it is a valid question, but the guys aren't necessarily critiquing the poetry itself. They're reacting to how the structural narrative clashes with modern psychological expectations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, take the Ahab comparison. Ahab's obsession with the white whale is a classic literary device. It's the tragic flaw that blinds the leader. And in this episode, Kirk goes completely rogue.
He really does.
He's willing to risk his entire ship, ignore a critical medical delivery to another vessel, and totally alienate his crew, all to hunt down this mysterious cloud creature that he has a deeply personal vendetta against.
The writers were clearly going for that heavy maritime tension. The captain pacing the deck, consumed by his white whale. But this is where the modern lens highlights the absurdity of the original script, because Jake and Justin quickly point out that this terrifying, deadly, blood-sucking cloud smells like honey.
Which introduces a severe tonal clash. I mean, the mechanism of suspense in a thriller relies on visceral primal threats.
Right, like blood or sulfur.
Exactly. Scent is an incredibly evocative sense, but the scent of honey evokes comfort, sweetness, and, domesticity. It does not evoke mortal peril.
It completely derails attention for a modern audience. Jake and Justin just start cracking up. They spend a solid 5 minutes wondering if William Shatner just loves the smell of his own farts.
That part was hilarious.
They literally joke about Kirk hunting his own farts across the galaxy. Yeah. It completely deflates the serious Ahab tension the writers were trying to build.
What is genuinely fascinating here, though, is the sheer emotional whiplash Jake and Justin experience. The episode sets up Kirk as completely unhinged. He's acting like a dictator, ignoring his crew, endangering everyone for a personal grudge. It builds and builds until we get what Justin jokingly calls a Star Trek soap opera moment.
Oh, yeah, the intervention.
Yeah.
Spock and Dr. McCoy corner Kirk in his quarters. And based on how television usually works, you expect a massive blowout fight or someone getting relieved of duty.
Yeah, some huge dramatic clash.
But instead, it turns into this shockingly emotionally mature conversation. These three guys just talk out their feelings. Kirk actually listens to reason. He steps back, looks at his friends, and basically admits that his past trauma is clouding his judgment and he's making an irrational decision.
And the guys are highly impressed by the scene in the video. They praise the rational discussion. From a psychological standpoint, it feels like a very progressive approach to conflict resolution for a show produced in the 1960s, which is an era not exactly known for portraying vulnerable, emotionally communicative male leaders.
But then literally, seconds after Kirk concedes that he's being completely paranoid, the cloud leaves the planet and starts acting suspiciously.
Proving that Kirk was actually right to be paranoid all along.
Okay, let's unpack this. It is like if Moby Dick ended with Ahab being proven right that the whale was actually an evil mastermind. Jake and Justin are totally right that it completely undercuts the moral of this story.
It really does.
You cannot have the captain learn a valuable, emotionally mature lesson about the dangers of obsession and then immediately validate his obsession by proving him right.
It's a massive structural zigzag. It rewards the exact toxic leadership traits the script just spent 40 minutes criticizing. And that erratic leadership directly leads into the element of the show that Jake and Justin were tracking most eagerly throughout their entire video, the body count.
Oh man, the red shirt counter. It was getting a serious workout. Kirk's obsession with this honey-scented cloud leads to a whopping 5 casualties in this single episode.
5.
Yeah. Jake and Justin are practically playing Queen's Mouse. Another one bites the dust in their heads every time the camera pans to a security guard.
5 casualties in a single episode is a staggering number, even for a show famous for killing off extras. It's actually a record for them on their show. But if we dig into why 1960s television relied on this trope, it is really a function of the era's production models.
How so?
While shows were heavily episodic and built for syndication, you couldn't kill off main characters or inflict permanent trauma on them because the episodes were meant to be aired out of order on local television stations.
So to establish high stakes and instant danger without altering the core cast, you just introduced disposable extras.
Exactly. The narrative mechanism requires a sacrifice to show the audience that the threat is real.
Which brings us to Ensign Garevich. Because of this incredibly high mortality rate, the guys zero in on this brand new security guard character. Now, Garevich actually has this emotional backstory tied directly to Kirk's past trauma, but Jake and Justin just look at him and assume he is, in their words, deliciously expendable.
Yeah, they were totally taking bets on when this poor guy was going to bite the dust.
Right, because they recognize the narrative mechanism at play. The guest star security guard with a sympathetic backstory is almost always the emotional sacrifice meant to teach the main character a lesson. The audience is supposed to feel the tragedy of his inevitable demise.
But then expectations are completely subverted. Garevich shockingly survives the final mission. He actually walks away at the end of the episode.
He does.
And the guys come up with the funniest theory for why he lived. They theorize he survived purely due to a video game-style buff they call Kirk proximity.
I love that. It's the idea that if you stand close enough to the main character, their plot armor temporarily extends to you.
Exactly. If you leave the Kirk proximity radius, you are dead. That idea of plot armor is a great example of 1960s TV magic, just bending the rules of reality to serve the main character's survival.
What's fascinating here is how this commentary changes the genre of the show. Jake and Justin treat these background character deaths not as the tragedies they were intended to be in 1967, but as a comedic game of bingo.
Yeah, it highlights how modern audiences distance themselves from the stakes of older television.
We gamify the tropes. We don't mourn the security guards. We calculate their survival odds based on their proximity to the captain.
And the ultimate punchline to the Garevich survival story. Jake and Justin look up the character's extended lore on the internet, and they find out his fate is incredibly ironic.
Oh, this is great.
This guy survives a face-to-face encounter with a blood-sucking space cloud, only to be killed off years later in a random shuttlecraft crash in the modern animated spin-off series, Star Trek: Prodigy.
You survived the most dangerous, lethal episode of the 1960s just to die in a shuttle accident off-screen decades later.
It is the ultimate indignity for a Starfleet officer. But hey, we're going to take a quick pause to hear from our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to look at how Jake and Justin noticed the writers didn't just bend the rules of reality for the characters, they completely ignored the rules of actual science, too. Stick around.
Hey, so let's talk about that amazing idea you've got. You know, the one that's always in the back of your mind? Well, it absolutely deserves to be heard. Today, we're going to look at a network that's built to do just that, to amplify your voice and make that idea a reality.
Seriously, think about it for a second. What's that one thing you're passionate about? That one story that only you can tell? We all have that topic we could just talk about for hours on end, right? But there's a catch. That's the big question, isn't it? It's the hurdle that stops so many fantastic ideas cold. The how of it all can feel, well, super overwhelming and honestly a little intimidating. So what if you had a partner to help you get over that hurdle? Well, let's meet Arete Media. It's a podcast network, and its whole mission is to help creators like you launch and grow their shows. Think of them as your partner in crime, helping with the tough stuff so you can just focus on being creative. Now, anyone can say they'll help, right? But the real proof is in the community they've built.
And you've got shows that dive into pop culture and revisit those childhood scares, like the Goosebumps crew, sitting right alongside shows that give you these sharp business insights, like Startup Cores with Salt, Arizona.
And the list just keeps going. There are shows about self-improvement, deep dives into the magic of Broadway, even really academic explorations of classical music. It just goes to show you there's a space for every single kind of creator.
It shows that no topic is too niche or, frankly, too bold. And this isn't just some static library of old shows. It's a living, breathing community. It's not just about making content, it's about celebrating it. For instance, they even host the annual Arete Awards to recognize the best shows on the network. And just to show you how active it is, here's the latest episode from the Average Intelligence podcast, which just dropped. Seeing this really drives home that the network is constantly platforming its creators and their brand new work.
So after seeing all of this, the question is pretty simple. You've got the idea. You've seen that there's a community waiting. Are you ready to take that step and finally share your voice?
And here's how you do it. The whole path from idea to launch is laid out for you right there. It's not just about podcasts. It's about the stories and the knowledge and the passion inside all of us. So, what's yours?
And we are back. Before the break, we were laughing about the Kirk proximity plot armor. But transitioning to the actual hard science of the show, I loved watching Jake and Justin actively fact-check the 1960s pseudoscience in real time.
Oh, this active fact-checking is a crucial part of the modern viewing experience. The creators of the original series never anticipated that the audience would have a globally connected supercomputer in their pockets while watching the show.
No way. They were just used to inventing technical jargon and assuming the audience would just nod along with the illusion.
Right. Yeah, Jake and Justin take immense joy in just Googling the show's made-up elements while they watch. For example, they look up the fictional element decuronium, which the cloud is supposedly made of, and confirm, yes, it is totally fake, some Star Trek nonsense, as Justin calls it.
Yeah.
But then they look up tritanium, which the show describes as a metal 20 times harder than diamond, used for the starship's hull armor.
And this is where the real world collides with fiction. Because tritanium is actually a real alloy.
It is.
But it is absolutely nothing like the super strong, impenetrable armor from the show. Jake discovers that real-world tritanium is a highly porous material used in modern medical implants, specifically for things like hip and knee replacements.
Right, and the reason it is used for that medical application is precisely because it is porous. In the medical field, there's a biological process called osseointegration. If a surgeon puts a perfectly smooth, impenetrable piece of solid metal into the human body, the surrounding bone has nothing to grab onto. The implant will eventually loosen.
Makes sense.
But because tritanium resembles the structure of a rigid sponge, natural human bone can literally grow into the microscopic pores, anchoring the implant permanently.
So instead of being an impenetrable barrier for a starship, its actual real-world value is that it is full of tiny holes. If the Starship Enterprise was actually made of tritanium, it would be like flying a giant metal sponge through the vacuum of space.
It's a wonderful little historical accident where the writers just picked a cool-sounding scientific word that ended up meaning the exact opposite of what they needed it to mean.
They also have a great time poking fun at the intense medical treatments on the ship. Dr. McCoy urgently asks for a drug called cordrazine, and Jake and Justin immediately joke that cordrazine is a hell of a drug, because a guy gets a shot of it and immediately dies. Not exactly FDA approved.
Definitely not. But the absolute pinnacle of their fact-checking comes from Justin. This is his moment of scientific triumph over Spock, the notoriously logical science officer.
Oh, this is brilliant. Here's where it gets really interesting. During the episode, the crew establishes that the cloud drains victims of their red blood cells. And it's established canon that Vulcan blood, Spock's blood, is green because it is copper-based, unlike human blood, which is red because it is iron-based.
Right.
This is the entire reason why the cloud doesn't want to eat Spock. It is allergic to copper.
However, during an autopsy scene, Dr. McCoy repeatedly refers to the victims and blood itself being drained of hemoglobin, and Justin immediately flags this contradiction.
He caught it right away.
He points out that hemoglobin, by its very chemical definition, is the specific metalloprotein in red blood cells that contains iron. That iron atom is exactly what binds to oxygen and gives human blood its distinct red color.
So if Spock has copper-based blood, he wouldn't have hemoglobin at all.
Exactly. The correct biological term for a copper-based oxygen transport protein is hemocyanin, which is what real-world creatures like horseshoe crabs and some mollusks possess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, hemocyanin turns blue or green when oxygenated rather than red. So by having Dr. McCoy and Spock talk about Spock's hemoglobin, the writers created a massive chemical impossibility. You cannot have copper-based hemoglobin.
So Spock and Dr. McCoy are just throwing around the word hemoglobin completely incorrectly. Justin totally outsmarts the ship's science officer. And I think this is such a perfect example of how modern viewers engage with vintage sci-fi.
It really is.
It's like looking at a famous painting under an electron microscope. You stop seeing the beautiful portrait, and you start seeing the bizarre chemical makeup of the paint and the frayed bristles of the brush. We don't just passively sit back and let the story wash over us anymore. We actively test the world building in real time.
It is a form of adversarial affection. We genuinely love the show, but we also kind of want to catch it making a mistake. It makes the viewing experience highly participatory. We are matching wits with television writers from 60 years ago, armed with a database of all human knowledge.
Exactly. And this active testing of the show's rules naturally bleeds into how the guys view the modern cultural discourse surrounding the franchise itself. Toward the end of the video, Jake and Justin take a detour to watch a promotional trailer for the upcoming Starfleet Academy series.
And while reacting to this new modern iteration, they inevitably touch upon a very loud online discourse. There's a vocal segment of the internet that constantly complains that modern iterations of the franchise have gone woke, arguing that the new shows are pushing a modern political agenda that betrays the classic roots of the original series.
Now, Jake and Justin push back on that complaint very simply. Their thesis is, quote, "That's just Star Trek." They view the franchise's progressive nature not as some new modern invention being forced onto the screen, but as a historical constant. To them, the DNA of the show has always been about pushing boundaries.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Jake and Justin's argument hinges heavily on the mechanics of nostalgia. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where audiences view the media of their childhood through rose-colored glasses. Over time, human episodic memory tends to filter out the cultural friction of the past.
Yeah, you only remember the good stuff.
Exactly. People easily remember the action, the alien planets, and the dramatic Kirk punches. But according to their video, those audiences filter out the fact that classic shows in the 1960s were often heavily critiqued in their own time for aggressively pushing cultural boundaries regarding race, gender, and international relations.
So whether you agree with their read on media history or not, Jake and Justin are arguing that when modern audiences get mad at modern storylines, those audiences are comparing the new show to a sanitized, frictionless memory of the old show, rather than the reality of the old show.
Precisely. By going scene by scene through an episode from 1967, Jake and Justin feel they are unearthing the show's original progressive ambitions right next to the clunky 1960s gender dynamics. They're looking at the actual text, warts and all, which leads them to reject the narrative that the franchise has somehow drastically changed its core philosophy.
It is a fascinating look at how two different generations can define the core of the exact same franchise. It proves you really do have to reckon with the actual text in front of you, not just your childhood memory of it.
This raises an important question, though, about the ultimate value of this kind of commentary. Why are we so drawn to watching other people watch things? We are an audio program analyzing a video program where two guys are analyzing a television program from 1967.
It is deeply meta, but I think it points to a fundamental shift in entertainment.
Right. Think about the era when Obsession first aired. December 1967. You watched it in your living room. The media was consumed in a relative vacuum. The experience ended when the credits rolled.
Right, it was a closed loop.
But today, the television episode itself is just the raw material. The actual entertainment product is the communal experience of watching a commentary dissect that piece of media. It adds a whole new layer of entertainment, the humor, the fact-checking, the modern context that the original creators could never have anticipated. We aren't just consumers anymore, we are co-creators of the experience.
Okay, lay it on me. Give the listeners that final, provocative thought to chew on.
Well, if we project this trend forward, think about how artificial intelligence and deepfakes are advancing right now. In another 60 years, podcasters might not just be commentating on 1960s Star Trek and pointing out the scientific flaws. They might be dynamically rewriting the episodes in real time.
Wait, so instead of just laughing about Spock incorrectly saying hemoglobin,
Yeah.
they could hit a button and generate a seamlessly altered scene where he correctly says hemocyanin.
Exactly. Or they could generate an alternate ending where Ensign Garvik uses his Kirk proximity buff to save the day, fundamentally altering the narrative. The text itself might become completely malleable. We wouldn't just be fact-checking the past, we would be actively patching it like software, creating personalized versions of classic media on the fly.
That is wild to think about. We go from passively watching to actively fact-checking to eventually recoding the media itself. Well, there you have it. Jake and Justin obviously had a lot of fun with this one. If you love Star Trek and a good time, you should definitely check out the Final Frontier podcast. See you next time.
The Final Frontier podcast. These are the voyages of Jake Boger and Justin Spur. Our weekly mission, to explore memories of Star Trek's strange new worlds, to recall the search for new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has had the spare time to go before.